The title insurance company called me on a Thursday morning while I was drinking coffee on the porch of the cabin my grandfather built with his own hands. And the woman on the phone said, very carefully, "Mr. Callahan, we've found a problem with the title. The property may not have been entirely yours to sell." I set down my coffee. The mountains were doing what they always did in October, going gold and red in the specific way that made people drive 4 hours from the city just to look at them. The cabin behind me smelled like pine, and the particular old wood smell of a building that has been loved for 50 years. The sale was supposed to close in 11 days, $890,000. The buyers had already given notice on their apartment. And there was a problem with the title. I stayed very still on the porch for a long moment. Then I asked the woman on the phone to explain exactly what she had found. And she told me about a deed of gift from 1987 that my grandfather had apparently signed, and that my family had apparently never known about, and that had transferred a partial interest in the property to someone whose name I did not recognize. A name I would spend the next 6 months learning in ways I had not anticipated. Part 1. The Cabin and the Family. My name is Eli Callahan, and I need to tell you about the cabin before I tell you about what was found, because the cabin is not just a property. It is a thing my family has been organized around for 50 years, a fixed point in the particular geography of who we are. My grandfather, Patrick Callahan, built it in 1971 on 12 acres in the mountains of western North Carolina. He was a carpenter by trade and a stubborn man by nature, and he had built the cabin the way he did everything, slowly, correctly, without shortcuts. The timber came from trees he had taken down himself. The stone fireplace in the main room had been laid by hand over 3 weeks one summer. He had not hired a contractor for any of it. He had died in 2019 at 81, leaving the cabin to my father, who had died 8 months later, a sequence of losses that still sat in my chest in a specific way that I had not fully finished processing. My mother had preceded both of them by a decade. I was an only child. By the spring of the year this story begins, I was 34 years old and the sole heir to everything, including 12 acres and a hand-built cabin that was worth considerably more than my grandfather had ever imagined it would be. I was also, by that spring, a person who was trying to figure out what to do next. I had spent 10 years in Charlotte doing the things you do when you are responsible and practical, an accounting career that had been successful in the quiet way of sustained competence, a life that was organized and solvent, and that I had stopped being certain I wanted. After my father died, I had taken 6 months of leave that had become a year, and then had not ended, not formally. I had been living in the cabin, which was mine now, which was empty in a way that was also full of the specific weight of everything my grandfather had built, and everything my father had loved, and the particular question of what I was supposed to do with all of it. The decision to sell had not come easily, but it had come. I had listed the property in August at $850. The offer at $890 had come in September from a couple who had fallen in love with the mountains and who wanted to spend their lives there in a way that I thought my grandfather would have approved of. I had said yes. I had started packing. And then the title insurance company had called on a Thursday morning. The problem, as the woman on the phone explained it, was this. In 1987, my grandfather had signed a deed of gift that transferred a 25% undivided interest in the property to a man named Theodore Marsh. The deed was recorded in the county records. It had been there for 37 years, properly filed, legally valid, entirely missed by 2 previous title searches, one when my grandfather had refinanced in 1998, and one when the property transferred to my father in 2019. Theodore Marsh, if he or his heirs still held that interest, had a legal claim to 25% of any sale proceeds. Without their signature on the deed of sale, the transaction could not close. "Who is Theodore Marsh?" I had asked. "We were hopping, you might know," the woman had said. I did not know. My father had not known. My grandfather had never mentioned anyone by that name in my presence. Theodore Marsh was, as far as I could determine from a full day of going through every box of papers in the cabin, a complete mystery. I called my real estate attorney that afternoon. He said, "We need to find Theodore Marsh." Part 2, The Search. Finding Theodore Marsh took 3 weeks, and the services of a title researcher named Joan, who worked out of Asheville, and who had the particular focused tenacity of someone who found property mysteries genuinely interesting rather than frustrating. Theodore Marsh had died in 2003. He had been 62 years old. He had lived most of his adult life in Asheville, had worked as a high school art teacher, had never married, and had left his estate, including, as Joan discovered, his interest in 12 acres of mountain property, to his nephew. The nephew's name was Daniel Marsh. Daniel Marsh was 36 years old. He lived in Asheville. He was, according to the records Joan found, a restoration architect, someone who worked on historic buildings, a specialty that involved understanding old structures and the intentions of the people who built them. He was, also, apparently entirely unaware that he owned 25% of a mountain cabin worth $890,000. My attorney called him first. I was on a separate call with the title company when this happened, and I got the report afterward. Daniel Marsh had been quiet for a very long time when told. Then he had asked to see the documentation. Then he had said he would need to speak with his own attorney before responding. His own attorney had reached out the following day. The situation, legally, was this. Daniel Marsh's 25% interest was real and valid. He was entitled to 25% of the sale proceeds, which at the agreed price was $222,500. The sale could close on schedule if he signed the required documents. If he did not sign, the sale could not close, and the buyers might walk. My attorney arranged a meeting. I drove to Asheville on a Tuesday morning in November to meet the man who owned a quarter of my grandfather's cabin. Part 3, The Meeting. The meeting was at my attorney's office. A conference room, legal documents, 2 attorneys and their clients across a table from each other. This is the formal version of the story. The formal version is accurate. But the thing I remember about that Tuesday morning is not the legal documents. I remember walking into the conference room and seeing Daniel Marsh for the first time and thinking, with the particular clarity that sometimes arrives in moments of complete surprise, that I had not known what to expect, but it was not this. He was tall, with the kind of presence that comes from years of working in old buildings, a physical ease with space, with scale, with the dimensions of things. He had dark eyes that were, when he looked at me as I came in the middle of something, not blank in the middle, processing. He was, I could see immediately, someone who thought carefully before speaking and who was not going to perform anything he did not feel. He stood when I entered, extended his hand. "Eli Callahan," I said. "Daniel Marsh," he said. His hand was the hand of someone who worked physically as well as professionally. Architects who do restoration work spend time on sites, in old structures, with their hands on the actual material of buildings. I noted this and filed it and sat down across the table from him. The attorneys did the talking for the first 20 minutes. Documents, timelines, legal options, the path to closing. I watched Daniel Marsh listen to his attorney with the same focused quality he had been radiating since I walked in. He asked 2 questions, both precise, both cutting to exactly the right thing. His attorney answered them. He nodded once. Then he looked at me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. His attorney shifted slightly. My attorney's expression became alert. "Yes," I said. "Your grandfather built the cabin in 1971, he said. "The deed of gift was signed in 1987. Do you know anything about the relationship between your grandfather and my uncle?" I looked at him. "No," I said. "I didn't know your uncle existed until 3 weeks ago." He absorbed this. "Neither did I," he said. "Know about the property." We looked at each other across the conference table. "I'd like to understand it," he said. "Before I sign anything, I'd like to understand why my uncle had a quarter of your grandfather's cabin and what it meant." I had not expected this. I had expected a negotiation about money. I had expected legal maneuvering. I had not expected someone who wanted to understand the history before they decided what to do with it. So would I said honestly. The attorneys exchanged a look. Perhaps, my attorney said carefully, we could schedule a follow-up meeting once both parties have had time to research the background. Daniel Marsh and I were still looking at each other. Yes, he said, let's do that. Part 4, the archive. What I found in the next 2 weeks came from the boxes. My grandfather had kept everything. This was a quality I had always known about him. He was a man who did not discard, who believed that things had their uses even when the use was not immediately apparent, who had boxes in the cabin's storage room labeled with years going back to the 1960s. I had been through some of them before, but not all. Not the ones from the 1980s. I went through them now. What I found in a box labeled 1986-1989 was a correspondence. Letters, actual letters, handwritten, in envelopes that had been carefully saved and rubber-banded in chronological order. Letters between my grandfather, Patrick Callahan, and Theodore Marsh. I sat on the floor of the storage room in the November cold, and I read them. They were not what I expected. Not a business correspondence, not the letters of acquaintances. They were the letters of two people who had been important to each other. The language was careful. These were men of a generation that did not name things directly, but the care itself was the content. My grandfather wrote about the mountains the way he talked about the things he loved, with a specificity that was its own declaration. Theodore Marsh wrote about his students, about a painting he was working on, about what the mountain light did at certain times of year. The deed of gift was mentioned once, obliquely, in a letter from my grandfather dated September 1987. The papers are signed. What's mine is yours, as it has always been in the way that matters. Now it's official in the way that matters to the law as well. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I understood, reading those letters, something about my grandfather that I had not known. Not something that changed who he was to me, something that added to it, that made the picture more complete. The cabin he had built with his own hands, the property he had loved, the place that was the fixed point of our family. He had wanted Theodore Marsh to have a piece of it. He had made it official in the way that matters to the law. I called Daniel Marsh. He answered on the second ring. I found something, I said, in my grandfather's papers. A pause. What kind of something? He said. Letters, I said, between your uncle and my grandfather from the 1980s. Another pause, longer. How many? He said. I've found 43 so far, I said. I think there are more. Silence. Can I? He started. Yes, I said, before he finished the question. Come to the cabin, read them. Part 5, the cabin in November. He drove up on a Saturday. The mountains in November are a different thing from October. The leaves are gone, the trees bare, the sky a specific gray that turns the landscape into something more honest and less performed than the fall colors. I had been in the cabin all week, going through boxes, finding more letters, making coffee and reading, and trying to understand the shape of a relationship that had existed in the space between these letters, and that had been invisible to me my entire life. Daniel Marsh arrived at 2 in the afternoon. He parked by the road and walked up the path to the cabin, which you had to walk because the driveway was meant for summer use, and the November mud made it impassable. He was in good boots and a worn jacket, and he looked, coming up the path, like someone who was at home in landscape, like someone who knew how to be in a place without imposing on it. I met him at the porch. This is extraordinary, he said. He was looking at the cabin, the structure itself, the way my grandfather had built it into the hillside, the proportions of the porch, the stone chimney on the east end. He was looking at it the way I imagined he looked at buildings professionally, with the attention of someone reading the decisions embedded in the construction. He built it himself, I said. Everything. I can see that, Daniel said. You can always tell. There's a quality of care in hand-built things that production construction doesn't have. The decisions are personal. He looked at the porch railing. He made this railing with the grain of the wood going the right way. Most people don't think about that. I looked at the railing. I had grown up holding that railing and had never thought about the grain of the wood. "Come in," I said. "The letters are in the main room." I had laid them out on the kitchen table in chronological order. 47 letters in total, spanning from 1985 to 1997. My grandfather's letters were in his handwriting, large, careful, the handwriting of someone who had taught himself to write well and was proud of it. Theodore Marsh's letters were in a teacher's hand, smaller, precise, with occasional sketches in the margins. Daniel sat down at the table and looked at the letters for a moment without touching them. "Can I?" he said. "They're as much yours as mine," I said. "More, maybe." He picked up the first one. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen window and looked at the bare November trees and did not watch him read. Or I tried not to watch him read. I was not entirely successful. He read for a long time, an hour, maybe more. I refilled the coffee and sat on the other side of the table and read some of the letters I had already read, because they were worth reading again. The room was quiet except for the sound of paper and the particular sounds of a mountain cabin in November. Wind, the creak of the structure settling, the fire I had made in the stone fireplace. When he put down the last letter, he looked at the fire. "My uncle never talked about this," he said. "Not to me, not to my family." "My grandfather didn't either," I said. "This was a different time," he said. It would have been different." "Yes," I said. He looked at the stack of letters. "He kept them," Daniel said. "Your grandfather, 47 letters, 40 years. "He kept everything," I said. "But yes, these specifically." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "My uncle painted," he said. "He left me his paintings when he died. I have them in storage in Asheville." He paused. "I never understood why he left them to me specifically. Of all the family members, he chose me." I looked at him. "Maybe he knew something," I said carefully. Daniel met my eyes. "Maybe," he said. We sat with that in the fire-lit room, with the letters between us and the November mountains outside. Part 6. What was built between them? Over the following weeks, the story came together in pieces. My grandfather and Theodore Marsh had met in 1984 through a community building project in Asheville, a restoration project. As it happened, one of the early ones in the historic district that Theodore had been involved in through the school, and that my grandfather had been brought in to consult on for the carpentry elements. They had been in each other's lives for 13 years, until Theodore's declining health in the late 1990s had made the mountain visits impossible, and the correspondence had slowed. The deed of gift in 1987 was, as I understood it from the letters, my grandfather's way of making permanent and legal something that he felt was already true, that the cabin, which he had built in part with Theodore in mind, which he had shared with him over years of visits, was in some real sense Theodore's as much as his. He had given him a quarter because he was a practical man and understood that he had a family and a family's claims on the other 3 quarters. Theodore had, apparently, never told his family. The interest had sat in the county records for 37 years, unknown. Daniel had been researching on his own as well. He had found things in his uncle's apartment, still not fully cleared out, a task he had been avoiding for 2 years, that corroborated the letters. Postcards from the mountains. A photograph of 2 men on a porch that I recognized as my grandfather's porch from the stone chimney visible in the corner. On the back, in my grandfather's handwriting, October 1989, 2 old men on a good porch. He had sent me a photo of the photograph. I had looked at it for a long time. My grandfather at 50-something. In the way I half remembered him from photographs of that era, strong, weathered, the carpenter's build, and a man I had never seen before who had the particular face of someone who was happy without performing it. Theodore Marsh on my grandfather's porch in October 1989. I had texted back, "He looks happy." Daniel had replied, "He does. I don't have many photos of him looking like that." Part 7. The VISITS. The research became a reason for visits. I say became because it started as a reason and then became something else, which is how these things work. He came back to the cabin twice in November. I drove to Asheville once to meet him at his office, which was in a restored building in the historic district. He had chosen it deliberately, he said, because working in a building that someone had cared enough to preserve changed how he thought about the work. The office was full of architectural drawings and material samples, and the particular organized density of someone whose thinking exists in physical form. He showed me some of Theodore's paintings that he had brought out of storage. They were landscapes, mountain landscapes mostly, in a specific palette that I recognized immediately as the mountains around the cabin. The cabin itself appeared in two of them, painted from the meadow below the east side at different times of year. He painted the cabin, I said. Several times, Daniel said. I didn't know where it was until now. I looked at the paintings. My grandfather's cabin, seen through someone else's eyes in someone else's hand. The same building, different angle. The same stone chimney. The particular way the porch faced the valley. These should be in the cabin, I said. He looked at me. They're yours to do with what you want, I said. I mean legally. I know what you meant, he said. I'm thinking about what you said. I need to tell you about the specific quality of being with Daniel Marsh, because it is relevant to what happened between us, and I want to describe it accurately. He was someone who moved through spaces with the attention of a person who understood that spaces had been built by people with intentions, and that understanding the intentions changed how you occupied the place. He did this with buildings, and I came to understand, with people too. He paid attention to you in the way that told you he had noticed something specific and was filing it carefully. He was also, and this took me longer to notice because I was so absorbed in the cabin and the letters and the history, someone who got funnier as he became more comfortable. The first meeting in the conference room had been formal and precise. The second visit to the cabin had been warmer. By the third visit, he had said something about a structural choice my grandfather had made in the kitchen addition that was simultaneously exactly right architecturally and extremely funny in its stubbornness. And I had laughed in a way I had not laughed in a while, and he had looked slightly surprised by the laugh and then looked pleased. I filed that. I filed a lot of things in those weeks. I was not in a position to be examining what I was filing. I was in the middle of a property dispute and a family history mystery and a sale that was on hold and a life that was already in a state of transition. I was not going to add something else to that list. But the filing continued anyway. Part 8, The Storm. A specific evening in December. Daniel had driven up for what was supposed to be a short visit, a few hours to go through some additional papers I had found, and to take measurements of the cabin for a structural assessment he had offered to do, the kind of assessment he did professionally, and that would be useful regardless of whether the cabin sold or didn't. He had arrived at noon. By 3 in the afternoon, the weather had changed. Mountain weather in December does this. It shifts faster than any forecast accounts for, the system coming over the ridge in a way that turns an overcast afternoon into something else entirely. The snow started at 3:30. By 4, it was serious. By 5, the road down was impassable. I had driven that road enough times in winter to know the difference between passable and not, and this was not. You'll have to stay, I said. He looked out the window at the snow, coming down in the specific determined way of mountain snow that has made a decision. I don't want to impose, he said. You're not imposing, I said. You're stranded, those are different. He considered this. There's a bed, I said. The back bedroom. My grandfather kept it made up old habit. I've kept it up too. I didn't pack anything, he said. There are things, I said. He kept things for guests, old habit again. He looked at the snow. All right, he said. We made dinner together. This was not planned. It emerged from the practical reality of 2 people in a kitchen with available food and the mountains snow outside. He was competent in a kitchen in the way of someone who had lived alone long enough to have developed real skills out of necessity. I was competent in the way my grandfather had taught me, which was, you do the thing properly or you do it over. We ate at the kitchen table where the letters had been spread out weeks ago. The fire was going. The snow was still coming down outside the window. The cabin was warm in the way of hand-built things that were built to be warm deeply, structurally warm, the walls holding the heat the way they had been designed to. We talked through dinner and for a long time after dinner. Not about the letters, not about the legal situation. About other things, about the work we had each done, about the places we had each lived, about what it meant to be the person left when the people who built something were gone. He talked about the restoration work with the particular love I had come to recognize from the previous weeks, the love of someone who had found the exact right thing and knew it. He talked about a church he had worked on in Asheville, 19th century, that had been threatened with demolition until a community effort had saved it and brought in his firm. He talked about the specific satisfaction of understanding what the original builders had intended and finding the way to honor that intention with contemporary materials and methods. I talked about the cabin, about growing up spending summers here, about my grandfather teaching me to build things, small things first, birdhouses and boxes and a bench that still sat on the porch, and the specific quality of his patience when teaching, which was total and unhurried and demanded the same quality in return. That's how good teachers teach, Daniel said. He wasn't a teacher, I said. He was, Daniel said, just not by title. I looked at him across the table. Your uncle was, I said. He was, Daniel said. I didn't have him much as a teacher. He existed at the edge of the family, the unusual one. People were fond of him but didn't know what to do with him. I was young enough when he died that I didn't get enough time. The paintings, I said. The paintings, he said. That's what he left me. I think he knew I was going to need them. The fire was low. The snow had slowed outside the window to the quiet kind, the kind that falls after the wind has stopped, straight down through cold air. Daniel, I said. Yes, he said. The letters, I said. What my grandfather wrote. What's mine is yours, as it has always been in the way that matters. I think your uncle was important to him in a way that I didn't know about. I'm glad I know now. He looked at the fire. I'm glad too, he said. I used to wonder about him, who he was fully. I only ever got the version the family presented, which was partial. He paused. The paintings were the fullest version of him I had. Now I have the letters. And the cabin, I said. He looked at me. And the cabin, he said. We sat in the fire-lit room with the snow outside and the quiet of a mountain evening that had taken both of us somewhere neither of us had planned to go. Part 9, the morning. He was awake when I came out of my room at 7. He had made coffee, found the equipment, figured out my system, produced a result that was correct. He was standing at the kitchen window looking out at the snow-covered meadow, the bare trees white, the sky a clear, cold blue that comes after a mountain storm. The road will open by noon, I said. The sun will take care of it. I know, he said. He handed me a cup of coffee. I grew up in these mountains. I know how the roads work. I took the cup. We stood at the window together and looked at the white meadow, and I thought about the painting. One of Theodore's paintings, currently leaning against the wall in Daniel's Asheville office, of this meadow in a different season. The same view, different light, different hand. I've been thinking about the sale, I said. He was quiet, waiting. I've been thinking about what I want, I said. Not what I should want, not what makes financial sense, what I actually want. He turned to look at me. And, he said. I don't know yet, I said. But I know that making the decision correctly is more important than making it quickly. And I know that whatever happens, I gestured at the window, the cabin behind us, the letters still on the table. This has changed the shape of it. He looked at me for a long moment. The buyers have been patient, he said, but they won't wait indefinitely. I know, I said. Whatever you decide, he said. My signature on the paperwork is not contingent on the money. I want you to know that. My uncle's interest in this property was not about money. Based on everything I've read, it was never about money. I looked at him. What was it about? I said, though I thought I knew. It was about being part of something, he said. Being allowed to be part of something real, and having someone make that official in the way that matters to the law. He looked at the window again. I think my uncle would have wanted the same thing for me, to be part of something, not to extract something from it. The morning light was coming through the window in the specific way it came in winter, low and cold, and very clear. "Stay," I said, "for breakfast before the road opens." He looked at me. "Yes," he said. Part 10, The Distance and the Misunderstanding. I am going to tell you about the weeks after the storm honestly, because they were not smooth, and the story is better for including that. I had said I needed to think about what I wanted. This was true. But I was also, in the way of someone who has been carrying a lot for a long time, using the thinking as a reason to hold back from something else. The sale, the decision, the uncertainty of it all, these were real and required real attention. They also became, without my fully intending it, a wall I was keeping between myself and the more personal thing that I was not yet ready to examine directly. Daniel drove back to Asheville when the road opened. We had texted during the following week about the legal timeline, about the research, about a detail in one of the letters he had thought of afterward. Professional, practical, the content of what we had been doing. The tone was slightly different from the storm evening. Not cold, careful, both of us being careful. I understood this, and I also understood that I was the reason for the care. I had not said anything that invited anything. The storm evening had been what it had been, and neither of us had named it, and in the absence of nomming it had become something we were both navigating around. He stopped initiating contact for about 10 days. Not dramatically, just the specific quieting of someone who is giving you the space you appear to need. I noticed the quieting. I noticed it in the way I had been noticing things about Daniel Marsh since the conference room, with more precision than the situation called for. I called my oldest friend in Charlotte, a woman named B who had known me for 15 years, and who had the particular gift of saying accurate things without embellishment. I told her about the cabin, the sale, the letters, the legal situation. She listened. Then I told her about Daniel Marsh and the storm evening and the morning coffee and the meadow. She listened to that too. "What do you want?" she said. Same question I had been asking myself. "I don't know yet," I said, same answer. "Yes, you do," she said. "You're just being careful because being careful is what you do when you're scared." I was quiet for a moment. "He's involved in a legal situation with me," I said. "He owns a quarter of my cabin." "That's a circumstance," she said. "It's not the reason." "It's complicated," I said. "Everything real is complicated," she said. "The question is whether the complicated is worth it." I looked at the fire. "B," I said. "Eli," she said. "He said his uncle's interest was about being part of something," I said. "Not about money, about being allowed to be part of something real." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very specific thing to say," she said. "Yes," I said. "And," she said. "And I think I've been standing outside something," I said. "For a while, not just since the title insurance call, for longer than that, standing outside and being careful." "I know," she said. "I've watched you do it for 2 years." "I'm tired of it," I said. "Good," she said. "Then stop." Part 11, the thing I said. I drove to Asheville on a Wednesday. I had not told him I was coming. Not because I wanted to surprise him, but because telling him in advance would have given me time to talk myself out of it, and I was done giving myself time to talk myself out of things. His office was in the historic district, the restored building, 2nd floor. The door was open when I got there, which meant he was in. His assistant, a young person at a desk in the front room who looked up when I came in, asked who I was and I gave my name and she said he was with someone and could I wait. I waited. He came out after 15 minutes, client in tow, and saw me in the waiting area. His expression did the thing it did when he was surprised, a brief, visible adjustment, and then settled into something careful. "Eli," he said. "Hi," I said. The client left. His assistant found somewhere to be. The office was quiet. "Come in," he said. We went into his office. The drawings and material samples and the organized density of someone whose work existed in physical form. I sat in the chair across from his desk. He sat at his desk. The historic district outside the window was doing its December thing, decorations, a particular quality of pedestrian traffic, the specific atmosphere of an old city in winter. "Is something wrong with the legal situation?" he said. "No," I said. "The legal situation is the legal situation." He looked at me. "Then what?" "I've been standing outside something," I said. "For a while, not just since October, for longer than that. And I've been using the cabin and the sale and the legal complexity as a reason to keep standing outside." He was very still. "I don't want to do that anymore," I said. "I wanted to say that directly, in person, not over text." He looked at me for a long moment. "Eli," he said. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "I'm not asking for anything. I needed to stop being careful about this specific thing. Everything else I can be careful about. This I couldn't keep being careful about." He stood up. He came around the desk, and he stood in front of me, and I stood up because it seemed right to be standing. And we were close in the way of two people who have been not quite close for 2 months, and have now removed whatever the distance was. "My uncle left me the paintings," he said, quietly. "I used to think it was because he didn't know what else to do with them. I understand now that it was because he knew I was going to need them. He couldn't tell me why. He could only give me the evidence and let me figure it out." I looked at him. "He gave your grandfather a quarter of a cabin," he said. "He couldn't say what it meant. He just made it official in the way that matters to the law." "Yes," I said. "I've been standing outside something too," he said. "Since the conference room, if I'm honest. Since you said you wanted to understand the history before deciding anything, and I realized that was the same thing I had been thinking." I looked at him, this person who had come into my life through a title insurance call and a 37-year-old deed of gift and a box of letters in a mountain cabin, and who had turned out to be the most specific and attentive person I had been near in a long time. "So we stopped standing outside," I said. "Yes," he said, "we stopped standing outside." Part 12, What the Cabin Became. 3 months after the title insurance call. The sale did not close in November. It did not close in December. In January, I called the buyers and told them that I was withdrawing the property from sale, and that I was sorry for the time they had invested, and that I hoped they found the mountain life they were looking for somewhere else. The buyers were disappointed. My real estate agent was very disappointed. My attorney accepted it with the specific equanimity of someone who has seen many real estate transactions, not close for many different reasons, and who has learned not to be surprised by human beings. I had made the decision alone. I want to be clear about that. Not because of Daniel, not primarily. Because of the letters and the photograph and the morning after the storm when I had stood at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee that someone had made correctly and had looked at the snow-covered meadow and understood something. The cabin was not a property to be optimized. It was a thing my grandfather had built with his own hands and given a piece of to someone he loved because he wanted that person to belong to something permanent. Selling it for $890,000 was legal and financially sound and felt entirely wrong. I told Daniel when the decision was made. He had not asked about it. We had been careful to keep the personal and the legal separate, which was the right thing to do. I told him, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What will you do with it?" "Live in it," I said. "For now, figure out the rest." "The 25%, he said. "Is yours," I said. "Whatever that means going forward, we can figure out the legal structure, but it's yours. My grandfather made it official in the way that matters to the law, and I'm not undoing that." He was quiet for a moment. "Eli," he said. "Yes," I said. "Theodore's paintings," he said. "I'd like to bring them up, if that's all right, to the cabin." "They should be in the cabin," I said. "They've always been about the cabin." "Yes," he said. He brought them in February, on a day when the snow was still on the ground, but the sun was out, and the mountains had that specific winter clarity that makes everything look like it has been defined more precisely than usual. We hung them in the main room. There were 4 of them, different sizes, different seasons: the meadow in summer, the cabin in fall, the ridge in winter, and one that was just the stone fireplace, which Theodore had painted from inside the cabin, the fire going, the warm light of it filling the canvas. We hung the fireplace one above the actual fireplace, stood back and looked at it. "He was here," I said. "He was here," Daniel said. The painting of the fireplace was looking at the fireplace. The fireplace was the same, 60 years on, the stone laid by hand over 3 weeks one summer. Both things were real. Both things were present. I had come to understand, over these months, that this was what the cabin was, a place where things that had been invisible became visible. Where a deed of gift from 1987 could be found 37 years later. Where letters between 2 men who couldn't say what they meant could say it anyway, in the specific care of their language, in the 47 envelopes saved in a box labeled with years. Where 2 people could stand in front of a painted fireplace and understand something about the people who had come before them and what they had tried, in the ways available to them, to preserve. Part 13, the spring. 6 months after the title insurance call. The cabin in spring is a different thing again. The green coming back, the specific smell of mountain spring, which is mud and pine, and the first flowers that grow in the gaps between rocks, the bird song that returns in March and gets louder through April. The porch comes back into use. The meadow below the east side goes green and then goes longer and starts to look the way Theodore had painted it. Daniel comes up most weekends, sometimes during the week when the work allows it. He has a project in the mountain region now, a historic farmhouse that needs the kind of attention he gives things, and the cabin is a reasonable base. This is practical. It is also not only practical. He has been working in the storage room on Saturday mornings, organizing the remaining papers with the methodical care he brings to archives. He has found things I missed. A journal of my grandfather's, fragmentary, not for anyone's eyes except the one set of eyes that kept it, which now means ours. A set of woodworking plans in Theodore's handwriting, plans for a piece of furniture that had apparently never been built. Daniel is going to build it. He has the plans and the skills and the particular motivation of someone who wants to finish something that someone else started. The wood is sourced. The tools are in the barn. I am going to help him. My grandfather taught me. Now I will teach someone else with the patience I was taught, with total, unhurried, demanding the same quality in return. The porch railing, where the grain of the wood runs the right way because my grandfather thought about it when most people don't. The stone fireplace, with the painting of itself hanging above it. The letters in the box, now more carefully archived. The handwriting of 2 men who found what they could say and said it in the space available to them. The painting of the meadow on the wall, where it can see the meadow through the window. The people who come because a title insurance company called on a Thursday morning and found a problem. Clapperboard final hook. The cabin was listed for $890,000. The title insurance company found a problem. The problem was a deed of gift from 1987. The deed was the evidence of something my grandfather could not say directly, but had made official in the way that matters to the law. He had given a quarter of the thing he loved most to someone he loved, and that quarter had sat in the county records for 37 years until a title search found it. The problem saved the cabin. The problem brought the paintings home. The problem brought Theodore Marsh's nephew up a mountain path in November boots, with the quiet attention of someone who understood that spaces had been built by people with intentions, and that understanding the intentions changed how you occupied the place. My grandfather made something official in the way that matters to the law. And 37 years later, the thing he made official changed everything. The grain of the wood runs the right way on the porch railing. The fireplace painting looks at the fireplace. The meadow is going green. The cabin is not for sale. If this story found something in you, if you have ever discovered something hidden in the record that changed the shape of what you knew, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Tell me in the comments, Has something unexpected ever changed the direction of your life in a way you couldn't have planned? And one last question. There is something else in the storage room. Something Daniel found on a Saturday morning that neither of us expected. Something that tells us one more thing about Patrick Callahan and Theodore Marsh and what they built and what they meant to each other. Should I tell you what he found? Part 2 is coming. Eyes. Subscribe. You will not want to miss it. The Revenge Chronicles.